Hello, friends. My name is Josman Ospino, and I am a professor of theology and religious education at Boston College, School of Theology and Ministry. Welcome to this session in which we will discuss, can we be friends across racial differences? A conversation with Pope Francis's Fratelli Tutti. Well, we live in a very interesting world, very interesting society, the United States of America. And as Catholic educators, we are constantly asked, how can we address questions of racism? How can we move forward in a society that seems to be amidst major tensions that divide, hurt, sometimes exclude people from our faith communities, from our society? Racism is real. Racism is a reality that affects millions of lives directly, but also many more indirectly. Whether the victim or the person who receives attitudes that are racist and activities, actions that are racist, or whether we become the perpetrators, we all are affected. When one member of our faith community hurts, the entire community hurts. That's at the bottom of our Catholic ecclesiology and our Catholic anthropology. So let me invite you to look at what we are going to be doing in this presentation. I will walk you through three moments. No? In the first moment, I want us to look at what I want to propose as the way of friendship. And we are going to look at some theological grounding for this, and then see what Fratelli Tutti invites us to consider. Then we will look more directly at the question of racism and how racism becomes an obstacle precisely to that way of friendship. And then we will conclude with some pedagogical, educational recommendations as to how we can move forward. How can we address the reality of racism by fostering friendship, by fostering a community of friends? So in the first in the first part of our presentation, what we're going to do is we're going to look at the following three moments. One, or two moments. One, we're going to look at the roots of our Christian understanding of friendship, and we're going to say that the roots are grounded in our relationship with God. We know this, and it's important for us to remember this. And then I want to highlight key passages from Fratelli Tutti and a vision for friendship for our particular time. So let's begin. The way of friendship. So what we know for a fact is that we as educators are entrusted to build a community of women and men who care about one another, who care about the world, who care about the created order, and very importantly, who care about God and their faith convictions and how they relate to God. So we need to ask ourselves and teach our children and those we encounter in faith formation or evangelization moments, what kind of church do we want to build on the one hand, but more large, or larger than that is, what kind of world do we want to build? What kind of society do we want to inherit to our children and the next generations? Frankly, how do we want our students and families to remember our Catholic education? How are they going to remember it? In order to speak of friendship, we need to first begin with how we relate to God. For Christians, friendship is more than just a nice feeling. Friendship is more than just choosing to be with someone because we like that person, or because that person thinks like us, or because that person looks like us, or because that person actually agrees with us all the time. Friendship is bigger than that. And I think that, going to what one of the greatest thinkers of our Catholic tradition is always helpful, Thomas Aquinas. Thomas Aquinas spent quite a deal of his writings and his thinking on the question of friendship, particularly in the Summa Theologiae. Thomas Aquinas, begins reflecting on that passage from the Gospel of John, John chapter 15, verse 15, in which Jesus tells his disciples, I do not call you servants any longer. I call you friends. Well, the one question that we need to ask is, what does it mean to be friend with God, friends with Jesus? Friendship, no, from the Christian perspective and from the way in which we encounter it in the scriptures, friendship means love. Friendship is an expectation that we are called to love the other, but not a love that is always seeking to get something out of the other person. Love from a utilitarian perspective. No, for instance, in our English language, we say, we love my car. And why do I love my car? Because my car gives me prestige, or because it takes me from one place to the other. But that's not the kind of love that we're talking about here. We are talking about love that is relational, is communicative, and it demands mutuality. In other words, love is about desiring the good of the other person. That's what friendship is about. We become friends with others because we want what is good for them, what is the best for them, what is going to fulfill them. There is an expectation of mutuality in that love. Remember the communicative dimension, dialogical dimension, as a matter of fact, as we will see later on. From this, Thomas Aquinas borrows from Aristotle. There's no greater experience than being surrounded with friends. The love that God shares with us as our friend is not just any kind of love. It's not a love in passing, but it is love that is charity. Agape, is the word that is used in Greek. So the love that God shares with us is the God agape, is the God of self-giving, and at the same time, remember the mutuality dimension, it's the love of total receiving, total self-giving, total receiving. Okay, so it is through this love that we love others. So in loving God, in experiencing the love of God, we love others, we love the world, we love ourselves. And that's what friendship is about from this particular Christian perspective. Friendship then becomes an expectation on the part of every believer, every disciple of Jesus Christ. Friendship is ultimately that expectation of, loving the other with God's love. Because we all are children of God, no one is to be excluded of this love. We cannot simply say, I love those that I like and those that and stop or never offer the love to those I don't like. No one is to be excluded from God's love and from the love that we owe to others because we love God. If we claim to have true charity, if we claim that we are experiencing or practicing the effects of that friendship that we have with God, therefore we must pay attention to those who are in particular most in need, those who are most vulnerable. We must love them with charity, with the love of God. Sin separates us, and it separates us from God, from our sisters, from our brothers, from the larger world and the larger reality. Therefore, we must remember that love as friendship and friendship as love have a unitive power. No, charity unites us with God. Charity unites us with others. This is important because if we begin with this particular premise that love ultimately is, or that friendship is ultimately love, then the possibility of excluding someone because of their skin color or their cultural background or their immigrant status becomes a null question. Fratelli Tutti then offers us a vision of friendship for our time. And I want to share with you what I want to call 5 core characteristics that emerge in terms of friendship in Fratelli Tutti. Pope Francis says, and actually remember that these are just 5 of many others that appear in this beautiful document. Pope Francis says, friendship is openness to the other, okay? And I always smile about this, because friendship is an exercise of transcending borders, transcending those obstacles that separate us one from another. In Fratelli Tutti, number 99, Pope Francis says, a love capable of transforming borders is the basis of what in every city and country can be called social friendship, okay? Transcending borders, openness to the other, crossing borders. That's what love is all about. And we live in a society, as we will see later on, we live in a society in which we actually thrive in creating boundaries and setting up borders and walls and many other dynamics that separate us from one another. We just simply use the skin color as one of the biggest barriers to engage the other as a child of God or as a sister or as a brother. Pope Francis says that authentic and mature love and true friendship can only take root in the hearts that are open to growth through relationships with others. Isolation is not an option. Selfishness for the Christian person is not an option. Second characteristic, friendship implies, because of this relational dynamic that we described earlier, friendship demands the affirmation of what is human in the other person. In other words, friendship is the affirmation of the dignity of the human person. In number 106, Pope Francis says, Fratelli Tutti, social friendship and universal fraternity necessarily call for an acknowledgement of the worth of every human person, always and everywhere. Friendship compels us to affirm that we all are children of God, regardless our differences, regardless our statuses in life, whether it's migratory status or economic status or political status, or whether we stand on one side or the other of a particular equation or issue or question or dynamic in our society. Always, always, we must be open, remain open and willing to affirm the dignity of the other person. That's what friendship is about. 3, friendship is a recognition of who we are as individuals and groups, okay? Now, why does Pope Francis speak of friendship in this particular direction or from this particular perspective? Because we live in a world these days in which we are constantly singing the praises of globalization and anything that makes us homogeneous, everything that makes us interconnected. And for some reason, we have given primacy to the universal, to the homogeneous, to the general, and we forgot the particular. So even when we define what it means to be American, or when we define what it means to be Catholic, we tend to highlight the universality of those particular experiences, but we forget that when we say being American, we are also saying that there are Black Americans, white Americans, Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans, Native Americans, and a mixture of all of the above in our communities, in our churches, in our schools, in our neighborhoods, and everywhere we go. So friendship, an attitude of friendship from a Christian perspective, demands maintaining a healthy balance between an awareness of the universalities that shape us, but on the other hand, an affirmation of the particularities of who we are at the local level, at the particular level, at the level of life every day, life in lo cotidiano, the everyday experience of who we are. Four, friendship, no, in from the perspective of Fratelli Tutti and Pope Francis's vision, friendship, no, ultimately is expressed in a wonderful way, in a life-giving way, by entering in relationship with those who are poor and most vulnerable. And I invite you to return to this particular work because Pope Francis offers a beautiful reflection on the Good Samaritan, the story of the Good Samaritan. And in that story of the Good Samaritan, Pope Francis invites us to remember that friendship with the poor enshrines the gospel, enshrines the experience of God with humanity and the invitation for us to make that reality a part of everyday life. In Fratelli Tutti, number 234, Pope Francis says, the Latin American bishops, and on this one he's citing the document of Aparecida, have observed that only the closeness that makes us friends can enable us to appreciate deeply the values of the poor today, their legitimate desires, and their own manner of living the faith. The option for the poor should lead us to friendship with the poor. Now, take this with what we said earlier, that friendship with the poor then needs to be understood as an affirmation of the dignity of the poor. And not only that, the obligation that we have to love the poor, to love those who are victims of racism, those who are, their lives are violated every day because of prejudice. We need to engage them by through friendship, because in doing so we love them with the love of God. And that sense of mutuality we must expect, we should thrive moving forward, as a community that loves but at the same time receives, is loved. And finally, we got the fifth category that I want to highlight. Friendship has the common good as its ultimate goal. Okay. Now, this is very important. Pope Francis repeats several times the key emphasis on the common good. Friendship has an ultimate goal, the good of those with whom we are friends, of those we befriend. And in a society of friends, in a society of social friendship, there is no other goal more important than the common good, okay? In number 154, the Pope says, the development of a global community of fraternity based on the practice of social friendship on the part of peoples and nations calls for a better kind of politics, one truly at the service of the common good. You see, at the service of the common good. Sadly, politics today often takes forms of that hinder progress towards a different world. And that is one of the challenges that we face in our day, that we tend to see the relationships among nations, among societies, and within nations, within societies, as relationships that are to be serving particular interests, not the common good. If we really want to build communities that are Christian, or communities that are infused by the gospel, we need to start paying more attention to the common good. So notice those 5 characteristics of friendship from the perspective of Fratelli Tutti. Friendship as openness to the other, which is an invitation to transcend borders. 2, friendship as the affirmation of human dignity, of that what is human. 3, friendship as a recognition of who we are as individuals and as groups, an invitation to pay attention to the particular. 4, friendship with the poor and most vulnerable, echoing the story of the Good Samaritan. And 5, friendship that has the common good as the ultimate goal. Now, with this framework, now it's easier for us to move forward into the conversation about friendship, definitely, and also about how to do this in a context that is primarily diverse. So let's look closely at racism, and affirming its reality, and also indicating how, as a sin, it obstructs the way of friendship. So let's look briefly at 3 dynamics. 1, Fratelli Tutti is concerned about racism. 2, racism and anti-immigrant realities in the United States. And 3, the harmful effects of racial prejudice. So let's begin with the first thought: race relationships in the United States. I don't have to say much about this because all we have to do is turn our TV on and then, unfortunately, hear about the effects of racism. We know that in the United States of America, we live in a society in which being a member of a racial minority implies suffering the consequences of sometimes violence, discrimination, and prejudice. Unfortunately, our society was established, from that or with that foundation. There are many elements that are super positive about being members of the United States of America, but we cannot deny the story of slavery. We cannot deny the rise, not only rise, but also the entrenchment of white supremacy in our faith communities, in our society, in our neighborhoods, in our educational system, and so on. So yes, racism is a reality. And we also need to understand that racism is expressed in many ways. It is directly expressed in the harm that has been done towards people of, who are Black, the people who are Asian, people who are Native Americans, also Hispanic, but also it is expressed through anti-immigrant feelings, anti-immigrant sentiments, and how these sentiments are constantly exploited, particularly by politicians, unscrupulous politicians who want to play with immigrants, who want to play with minoritized communities as a football. And many times, before the silence of faith communities, sometimes aided by leaders of faith communities who use the scriptures, who use a twisted theology in order to justify these matters. So racism is a reality, and we must denounce it as a sin. We must confront it for what it is. Racism, expressed in in terms of the anti-immigrant realities, affects primarily those communities that have large numbers of immigrants arriving in the United States of America. And it's ironic that we as a church are knowing as Catholics the importance of immigration in the process of renewing societies, in the process of renewing the church. Many times our own members, our own structures, and we witness, sometimes with silence, how people attack immigrants, how people attack refugees in order to affirm sometimes ill-conceived understanding of what it means to be a citizen of the United States of America. Well, it's important to keep in mind that, or never forget, that we are a nation of, we're a nation of immigrants. This is who we are, except for the Native Americans who can trace their ancestry for centuries, even before the first immigrants came from Europe, came to the United States. We need to recognize that we are a nation of immigrants, and that immigration is constantly renewing who we are. Right now, in the 21st century, we are in the midst of a major renewal of Catholicism, largely because of immigrants. We know that in the United States of America, about 20 million Hispanics, immigrants from Latin America and the Spanish-speaking Caribbean, live in the United States. 20 million. And of those 20 million, about 15 to 16 million self-identify as Roman Catholic. This is besides the 40 million other Latinos, Latinas, Hispanics who live in the United States and are US born. But I'm focusing on the immigrant experience at this very moment. The fastest growing group in the United States of America is in the Catholic Church in the United States of America is Asians. We know that the Asian community, the majority of Asians at this point are foreign born. So it is sad when we not only ignore the reality of these communities, but then we witness on television or on the papers or in the local news attacks against these groups. More painful, actually, are the attacks against these groups in our own faith communities when they are discriminated, when they do not receive pastoral attention, when they are ignored in our Catholic schools, in our curricula, when they are ignored in the different activities that we do as Catholics, as we educate the next generation. But that needs to be fixed. And that's why we're having this. So if we don't approach, if we don't embrace a lens to enter into these conversations, then the challenge is that we will be unable to foster a way of friendship into what we are and who we are as a Catholic educational community. Fratelli Tutti is not blind to or deaf to questions of racism. As a matter of fact, Fratelli Tutti notices this all throughout the world, And let me just highlight a few passages from Fratelli Tutti that I think are important. For instance, in number 20 of the document, Pope Francis says, readiness to discard others finds expression in vicious attitudes that we thought long past, such as racism, which retreats underground only to keep re-emerging. Instances of racism continue to shame us, for they show that our supposed social progress is not as real or definitive as we think. So racism, somehow is this attitude that remains permeated in the structures, in the bones of our society. It's a cancer that has made metastasis and resurfaces every now and then, and it hides. And sometimes we fail to name it. The bishops of the United States, the Catholic bishops of the United States, have written a wonderful pastoral letter against racism, in which they actually invite us to name racist attitudes and to confront it. And I think that that's where we begin the educational process. Pope Francis says, racism, number 91, racism is a virus that quickly mutates and instead of disappearing, goes into hiding and lurks into waiting. Number 266, there is at times the tendency to deliberatively fabricate enemies, stereotype figures who represent all characteristics that society perceives or interprets as threatening. The mechanisms that form these images are the same that allow the spread of racist ideas in their time. So, Fratelli Tutti is, as I said, is not oblivious to racism, and it highlights the fact that it remains dormant in our society, and it awakes, hurts people, and then morphs. No, and if we fail to name it, if we fail to address it, then we will not be able to educate communities that are just, communities that are truly grounded in the gospel. And then now we move to our third slide, or the third part of our conversation. And on this one, so we're gonna look at the educational dimension of this conversation, no? So educating Catholics to embrace the way of friendship in a racially divided society. So in looking at Fratelli Tutti, we're gonna look at two symmetrically opposed cultures, the culture of walls, culture of isolation, and the culture of encounter. Then I'll offer a few thoughts on teaching and, to cultivate friendships with sisters and brothers, from different races. And then finally, the way of friendship in the Catholic school and faith formation program. So there are two, we could be speaking about two ways of, two cultures that coexist in many of our societies, that coexist in many of our realities. Pope Francis in Fratelli Tutti, number 27, speaks about the culture of walls that exists in every part of the world. People are building walls, whether these are walls that are physical walls, fences, to impede people from crossing borders, from integrating and so on, and the culture of isolation, in Fratelli Tutti, named in Fratelli Tutti number 30. Number 27, Pope Francis says, we encounter the temptation to build a culture of walls that raise walls in the heart, walls on the land, and in order to prevent this encounter with other cultures, with other people. And those raised walls will end up as slaves within the very walls they have built. They are left without horizons, for they lack this interchange with others. Walls in the hearts, physical walls, they isolate us, but at the same time, when we are separated from one another, we cannot build communities structured or sustained in the idea or the perspective, the vision of social friendship. To that culture of walls, culture of isolation, Pope Francis counters or proposes the culture of encounter. And this is a topic that Pope Francis has addressed several times. There are four characteristics that I briefly want to highlight about the culture of encounter. One, closeness. Okay, encounter is about getting close. In Fratelli Tutti, number 30, Pope Francis says, isolation and withdrawal into one's own interests are never the way to restore hope and bring about renewal. Rather, it is closeness. It is the culture of encounter. Isolation, no. Closeness, yes. Culture clash, no. Culture of encounter, yes. Two, a culture of encounter is a culture that affirms many voices, faces, and sides of our community. And I love this idea because Pope Francis is inviting us to be attentive to the diversity of our societies. No? So a culture of encounter is not a culture that seeks to separate people according to skin color or according to migratory status or according to economic circumstances, realities, or standards. A culture of encounter is a culture in which everybody has something to say and something to contribute, you know? So Pope Francis in number 215 says, I have frequently called for the growth of a culture of encounter capable of transcending differences and divisions. This means working to create a many-faceted polyhedron whose different sides from a variegated unity in which the whole is greater than the part. No? Pope Francis reminds us with this image of the polyhedron that that society has many faces, that there are many voices, that there are many ways of being Christian, of being human, and that we all have something to contribute, something to say. I think that that's one of the most beautiful images that we have in this culture of encounter. And Catholic education, at the end of the day, should be characterized precisely for that. Three, a culture of encounter is about reaching out, meeting others. Yes, we cannot wait just for people to come. We cannot simply wait for people to tell us what to do. We should take the initiative, go out. Number 216, to speak of a culture of encounter means that we as people should be passionate about meeting others, seeking points of contact, building bridges, planning a project that includes everyone. This becomes an aspiration and a style of life. That's got to be. We cannot wait for people to become like us or to stop being who they are. It is about reaching out in friendship, befriending them as they are, and sharing the good news of the gospel with them as we build the common good. And finally, this doesn't happen overnight. A culture of encounter is a process that takes time, that takes work every single day, that takes energy. In 217, Fratelli Tutti says, what is important is to create processes of encounter, processes that build a people that can accept differences. Let us arm our children with the weapons of dialogue. Let us teach them to fight the good fight of the culture of encounter. I think that that's the most powerful experience that we can have and we can offer to our children to create this. This happens overnight at home. Parents are supposed to be engaged in this, in catechesis, in the Catholic school, in the university, through social media, all the dynamics that we have to educate in faith. So we need to cultivate friendships with our sisters and brothers from different races. That's the key as we start looking at the pedagogical dimensions. How do we do this? Just briefly. One, meet people. That's what's it. I mean, we need to start meeting people from different races, from different cultural backgrounds, from different socioeconomic statuses. We need to reach out. We need to go out. Two, listen to their stories, and share your own story. And together, we should remembering together. Pope Francis is big about remembering the role of memory. Three, affirm the dignity of every person you encounter as human beings. That's key. Anytime we see that somebody is being denigrated, someone is being the victim of violence because of racial prejudice, we must denounce that. Four, advocate with prophetic voice. Announce the good news. Denounce the sin of racism. And five, cultivate friendships. How do you cultivate friendships? Very simple. Eat together. Pray together. Rejoice together. That's how we build communities in our churches, in our neighborhoods, and in the larger society. So how do we bring this way of friendship into the Catholic school, and or our faith formation programs? 4 practical tips. One, pay attention to your school environment, or the school or the catechetical environment in which you are. Ask yourselves, is my environment, my school environment, a place where someone who is Black, white, Hispanic, Asian, Native American, someone who just migrated from the into the United States, is this an environment where they will feel at home? Is this an environment that is telling them that you have to become white, or that you have to become something else, no, wealthy, or that you have to become someone who they are not, in order to belong, in order to be one of us? The environment is very important. We need to create that space. Two, look closely at your curriculum. I mean, when you are teaching history, or when you are teaching science, when you are teaching literature, if the voices of underrepresented communities are entirely absent, then that needs to be corrected. Because how else are we going to show that the contributions and highlight the contributions of the many Black people, the many Latinos, Latinas, the voices of the many immigrants who have transformed this society at all levels: science, architecture, literature, of religion, theology, and many other areas. So revising the curriculum on a regular basis is very important. There should be a national movement precisely about this for Catholic schools. Three, review policies, in terms of how people of color are being treated in your school, in your own catechetical program. To what communities do you market your school? To what communities do you market your catechetical program? Who do you hire? I mean, just look around and ask people around. Just how do you self-identify? And if your school doesn't have a Black person, or a Latino person, or an Asian person, maybe this is time to start actively recruiting members of these communities, because this is the church. It's important that our children understand and see physically, literally, who the church is, and how they can engage these people in their communities, in their stories. Who is promoted in our schools? What kind of outreach do we do? And in policies regarding discipline, it is known through research that children from minoritized communities are usually brought to disciplinary measures, or under disciplinary measures, more than kids who are white. The question is why? I mean, how do we apply discipline practices and policies in our particular school? And finally, we need to start asking, who embodies racial diversity in your school or your faith formation community? This goes back to who is in a position of leadership. Who do you invite to teach? Who do you invite to lead? Who do you invite to witness the gospel of Jesus Christ? So friends, thank you very much for this opportunity. I think that this is a great chance for us to, one, reread this wonderful document, Fratelli Tutti, and by Pope Francis, and two, to continue to discern ways to address racism in our society, in our church, in our own schools, in our own catechetical programs, and root out this particular sin. God bless you all.